It's time to talk about the very best comic books you can get your hands on this week. We got lots of indie comics. We got some Marvel comics. We got no DC this week, unfortunately. But I'll be honest, this week in particular was just kind of bad. Like, the stuff that was bad was really bad this week. Not a ton great going on. Thank goodness for the indie scene. Here with me to talk about that is Gabe Hernandez from Weird Science DC, as well as Comical Opinions. How you doing, Gabe?
I'm doing just great. Thank you for having me. Happy Sunday.
Well, happy Sunday to you, too. So we've got, like I said, 4 indie comics, including one Kickstarter in there, as well as a couple of Marvel comics to get to. Let's hit the indie scene first. Me, personally, this is my big recommend for the week. Nottingham, number 6 from Mad Cave, David Hazan, Shane Connery Volk. This is the continuation, obviously, of Nottingham that came out last year. Didn't know what to expect here, Gabe, and this was fantastic. They changed up the whole game. They changed up the dynamics between the characters. Now the sheriff and Robin of Locksley are kind of working together, and we got the introduction of another character people would love from the Robin Hood kind of folklore type stuff that you have. And I thought it was really well executed, and the art, once again, from Volk was fantastic.
Yeah, I have to agree. Of all the Mad Cave titles that they've got coming out recently in the past year and also coming up, this is one of the more exciting ones. It takes Robin Hood and brings it down to a Game of Thrones level of grittiness and almost a sense of realism that you just don't find when you're talking about classic Hollywood tropes related to Robin Hood. What makes this new season, if you want to call it that, it's not really a new arc, but it's just a continuation, but it's really sort of a new season, is Sheriff Blackthorn, who's the sheriff of Nottingham, is now aware of Hood's identity, and they're forced to come together as grudging allies to deal with King Richard, who's been captured. And they kind of have to figure out a way, not necessarily trust each other, but to work together enough not to kill each other. And it changes the whole dynamic of the story and makes it a lot more interesting as far as changing up the tone and tenor of where they're trying to go. The other thing that I noticed about this particular issue is I think the art quality from Shane Connery Volk has actually gotten better. So it has a very unique kind of stylistic, rich, dark, kind of almost blotchy line tone to it. But in this one, the lines are a little bit cleaner, the colors are a little bit sharper, and so story's better and art's better all the way around.
This is one of the comic books when I did my 10 comics I was looking forward to in 2022. Nottingham was high on the list, and it absolutely exceeded expectations. Yep. I didn't know that they would go in this direction, but I like this weird alliance that's come between the Sheriff Nottingham and Robin Hood, and where they're going to, obviously one of them's going to turn on the other. But what's it going to happen?
And surprisingly, at the very end, you find out that there's another character also famous in that mythology that turns out to be potentially just as much as a villain that you didn't expect. So there's a lot of interesting stuff coming up.
Yeah, that was great. We have another one. This is another adaptation of something that's been in print for a very long time. Ablaze is doing really awesome stuff with Conan. Their series of comics is called Cimmerian. This is an adaptation of Hour of the Dragon, a very well-known Robert E. Howard story with Conan. Julian Blondell, Valentine Searcher. Obviously, Robert E. Howard is the storyteller. They pretty much adapt it perfectly to comic books. It's the art that really puts this thing over the top, but this story is just badass. If you read it in a book, then you throw these awesome illustrations on it. It's almost perfect.
And this is what's remarkable about what Ablaze is doing. Conan is more prevalent right now with Marvel. Right now they have the license to it, and you see them doing things like Savage Avengers and whatnot. But here, Ablaze is taking the tack of saying, we're going to take the original stories and just almost point for point, shot for shot, adapt them into comic book form. And as far as adaptations go, it's almost near perfect. The writing is great. And the problem you have with adapting prose into comic form is you can't do everything. It's like adapting a movie from a book. You can't just get all the words in there and just get all the nuance and the details. It's just too much. But here, this example is almost a pristine example of taking the written word, adapting it into a visual form where you don't miss anything that matters. It's a perfect distillation. The art from Valentine Searcher is fantastic. It's just gorgeous. It's dark, it's gritty, the dramatic shadows are all over the place, and you just really get a sense. And I think the art on this issue is a little bit better than the first issue. So if you're a fan of classic Conan, you've been dying to see a comic that actually takes the original Robert E. Howard writing style and storytelling style and doesn't pull any punches, doesn't try to water it down, and just gives you a near perfect comic adaptation, Ablaze is doing it right.
And the cool thing is, at the end, you actually get the original story if you want to read it, and you can see how it was adapted. And they've done such a good job. This series of Cimmerian comics is absolutely fantastic. blows anything that Marvel is doing with the character right out of the water. It's just so good. Now let's go over to some of your recommendations. I like Project Superheroes. If you don't know what this is, it's Dynamite's attempt to kind of take public characters that are out there and turn them into kind of a superhero team. This is Fractured States #1. Ron Marz and Andy Lanning, a known writing pair, showing up with Emilio Utera.
Project Superpowers first gained notoriety through Dynamite and elsewhere because Alex Ross took a bunch of public domain characters back from the 20s, 30s, 40s, not 20s, 30s, 40s, etc., and brought them forward and put them together in Super Team and said, let's create a fresh, updated look to it. I have been begging other mid to smaller publishers to do more interconnected superhero stuff. Marvel and DC, as you'll find out, we don't really have any DC on the list, are just dropping the ball left and right. This is the perfect opportunity for a small to mid-sized publisher to pick up that ball and give fans who want superhero comics something to read. Project Superpowers, Fractured States, basically does like a forward time jump, taking one of the characters and throws him into an alternate future where just things have just gone terrible for the Earth, and he has to kind of figure out who he is because he lost his memory, figure out what his powers are, and just really try and get the Earth back into shape, if that's even possible. So this is a good way to introduce those characters, which have been around for a while and have a little bit of a fan base, but introduce them in a new way, kind of bring you readers up to speed, and the story is very interesting. It's more sci-fi than fantasy, but it really works on pretty much every level that you're looking for a superhero comic that's not from Marvel or DC.
Next up, we do have Drew from Comics Elite is normally my partner on these. We know that he's been crowdfunding some comic books through Merc Magazine. He sent you a copy, a reviewer copy of Born of Blood #1, and you're recommending that from Drew from Comics Elite, as well as Carlos Beccaria is the artist on that one. I believe he's from Argentina. Now, we know this is going to be a shared universe, and there's a couple of issues out there, and they're working a lot behind the scenes with Aaron Sparrow and Joe Corallo. What is it about Born of Blood that brought you in so well?
As you said, this is a Kickstarter, so on comicalopinions.com, we do indie submissions. So if you've got something, send it along. We'll take a look at it. And I promise you, because even though Drew and I have been on streams together, this is not a favoritism play. We may have bumped up the schedule a little bit just to kind of get his work in there. But what impressed me so much about this book is I'm a big fan of 300. I'm not a Snyder fan in general, but those types of gladiator type of, just Spartan combat warrior type films and stories. I love that type of stuff. This, in a lot of ways, is a spiritual successor to 300 in comic book form. You have a main character who's a princess who was sort of brought up under the disappointed eye of King Cleomenes, I think it is, from Sparta. And then she's just thrown, when she turns 18, she's just thrown in to become either sink or swim and become a warrior and be worthy of that role of princess, or die in the process. It is the perfect way to introduce a character, give them their entire backstory, but it's a kick-ass story at the same time, and it also helps you develop a respect for the character, that she's not just a leader because she was born into it, she's a leader and a warrior because she earned it. And you don't see that a whole lot in comics these days. So if you're looking for that kind of sword and sandal, gritty kind of warrior combat training montage type of comic, but also develops a character that is going to be part of an interconnected universe that you will really kind of be invested in and respect, this is actually an excellent example of that type of storytelling.
All right, so let's go over the big two, and there's only two comics we're going to recommend this week, and they're both from Marvel. DC just did make the cut. But Marvel had the very last chapter of Devil's Reign, the big event series. It was too bloated. There were too many tie-ins, but the main series from Chip Zdarsky and Marco Checchetto was actually pretty darn good. The visuals in this particular issue are fantastic. There are some great splash pages. As far as a finale for a big event, you get the big battle, you get a lot of conclusions, and this is actually paying off storyline from like 2 years ago that Chip Zdarsky had introduced with the Stromines and all these types of things going on. And I think it came together really well. This isn't the greatest thing of all time, but it's definitely worth reading.
You could certainly make the criticism that it was a very strong story, but maybe not big enough that it warranted being an event per se, but the main storyline, especially if you get rid of the tie-ins, but the main storyline really turned out well, and it did what an event is supposed to do. It changed the status quo. So that means for a number of characters, Matt Murdock and his brother Mike, for the Kingpin, for the Purple Man, a lot of their statuses going forward, and Kingpin's son Butch, a lot of their statuses going forward have now changed. Well, that's what you want out of a big event. A big event shouldn't put all the toys back in the toy box. It should take them and put them in a different toy box, where now you have to kind of absorb what's going on. And I think for me, what made this last issue such a benefit is I kind of have to sit with it a little bit and kind of absorb what is the implication of what's happened. I'm going to spoil a little bit. Kingpin sort of sails off in the sunset, sort of. The Purple Man is down, maybe. The power brokers behind the Kingpin are either down for permanently or at least temporarily. And Butch is Kingpin more than he was before. I know I'm sort of talking vagaries. I don't want to spoil too much, but there are definitely a lot of changes that happen in the universe. Now, whether or not somebody can capitalize on it and stick with it going forward in the Daredevil title remains to be seen, but it does what an event is supposed to do. It's got big action, big story. There are consequences to what's going on, and then you have a new status quo going forward. So there's definitely a lot to like in this issue.
And they definitely end the Elektra Matt story arc here, and they have a new mission moving forward. They're going on an entirely different direction because Kingpin is dealt with, and now they have to go kind of work on the hand, which we know there's another character working for the hand right now, which might make that pretty exciting. So I like that aspect. The real criticism I have, and this isn't a Chip Zdarsky thing or Devil's Raid thing, I'm tired of seeing heroes fight heroes to the death. Let's find a new gimmick to move on with because we've seen it enough.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, they at least disguised it well enough within the Purple Man group mass mind control situation, although I don't remember a circumstance where Purple Man could control people with purple lightning. I think that was new, or just I don't know where that came from. His powers have definitely evolved, so that's kind of have to wrap my brain around that a little bit. But yeah, I think the hero versus hero trope is we've had enough. It's time to move on. There are plenty of villains out there. There's no need to rehash that particular story point.
The other Marvel comic we're definitely going to recommend, and we've been recommending this essentially since day one here on the channel, Moon Knight number 10, Jed McKay, Allesandro Cappuccio. The art, once again, is fantastic. And the cool thing about this is one of the few times DC or Marvel has really got it right, where they have a really good series that's actually really hot, that's coming out in conjunction as they're adapting it to streaming or movies or something like that. A lot of times, you get to the Spider-Man movie and Peter Parker's dead, or you get to the Doctor Strange movie that's coming up and he's dead. Here we got Moon Knight. He's front and center, and he's in a really good story.
Moon Knight, as far as the series goes and being synergistic with what's going on in other media, is as close as Marvel, I think, has gotten so far. The Marvel, the Disney Plus Moon Knight series is out right now. They just passed week 2. I like it. I can see where some people might be a little bit confused by what's going on, because having split personalities and such can be confusing. So I get where some people might not kind of get what's going on there, but it's good that they have them out at the same time. The Moon Knight that is in the Disney Plus series is a little bit different than what's in the comics, but not so far off that you can't wrap your brain around it. The reason I recommended number 10 is because this issue number 10 and issue number 7 in particular were the two issues where I think Jed McKay really nailed the character. A lot of times he gets compared with Marvel's version of Batman, but he's different in certain aspects in that, the mental disorders really throw him off. And here he sort of demonstrates, in this issue, he demonstrates a sort of kind of I want to say coolness, maybe is not the right word, but he's kind of cool about it. He's there's almost an arrogance about his capabilities and how powerful he is when put up against villains that are at a similar level. So he just nailed it. And this one was also an interesting issue that Jed McKay kind of interwove two stories with a past timeline and a current timeline that came together, and then had a little bit of a flip at the end where you were sort of surprised by who a character really was. And then it ended in a way that really differentiates Moon Knight from Batman, where Batman kind of, I'm not going to kill anybody. There are certain lines I won't cross. Moon Knight shows that he's willing to cross lines when he thinks it's for the greater good. And this issue really captures the spirit, where I think overall in the series I've been a little up and down depending on the issue. But I think issue number 10 really nails the Moon Knight character and differentiates him as not just being a Batman knockoff.
If you're enjoying the Moon Knight series and you're like, well, I don't know what comic book to start on, just start with issue 1 and get your way to issue 10, and you're going to have a good time, because this is a really good series. Not exactly like what's in the Marvel or the Disney Plus stuff, but it's really close, and it's a really good interpretation of the character. Yep. No DC comics to really recommend this week. There were a couple of okay ones, but nothing I would just be like, you need to read this. It was just one of those down weeks. They tend to load up their weeks with 4 or 5 really strong titles at a time, and every once in a while you kind of get this. So Those are the 6 comic books that we're recommending this week. Nottingham, Cimmerian Hour, the Dragon, Project Superpowers, Fractured States, Border Blood, Devil's Raid, and Moon Knight number 10. I want to say thank you very much to Gabe for joining me. Really appreciate you standing in here. Do you have any final words?
No, that's it. Go read more comics and visit Weird Science DC Comics, Weird Science Marvel Comics, and comicalopinions.com.
As you may have noticed, Gabe is one hell of a nice guy, but every once in a while he gets himself in a little bit of trouble. He's actually one of the tougher comic critics out there. He actually got a little bit of hot water with Stephanie Phillips when he said that she gave fans a middle finger in her Harley Quinn comic book. If you weren't aware of that, this is what she had to say about Gabe. I stand behind him, and I think he was right about that comic book the whole time.